We went there just to spend the night. We weren't breaking in, we weren't looking for trouble. But I woke up in the middle of the night and realized something was very wrong. My friend's sleeping bag was empty, and something was slowly walking across the roof above us. Heavy, deliberate. Whatever was up there wasn't an animal. And the worst part? That place didn't want us to leave. This happened back in 2017. My friend Ethan and I had been exploring abandoned places together for years. We weren't reckless thrill seekers or vandals, more like careful urban explorers who preferred locations far from cities, places forgotten enough that no one cared if you were there, or noticed you weren't supposed to be. Most of our finds came from obscure forums and half-dead online threads. That's how we stumbled across a short Reddit post about an abandoned fire lookout somewhere in our state. The original poster never listed the location, clearly trying to keep it from becoming another trashed spot. The post barely had any engagement, which made it even more intriguing. I messaged the OP directly. At first, he ignored me. When he finally replied, he was hesitant, almost suspicious. It took a long back and forth before he finally agreed to send the coordinates, on one condition: we weren't allowed to share them with anyone else. He said the place didn't need more attention. When we checked the coordinates on a map, there was a structure marked deep in the woods. No nearby trails, no reviews, no photos, nothing else online about it. It felt erased. We packed our gear and headed out early Monday morning. Getting there was worse than expected. There was no clear trail, no signs, nothing to guide us except a shaky GPS signal. The deeper we walked into the forest, the more uncomfortable I felt. The woods were dense, quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. No birds, no wind, just stillness. If Ethan hadn't been with me, I would have turned around without hesitation. He admitted he felt it too, that pressure, like we weren't welcome. But neither of us wanted to be the one to call it off after driving all that way. What made it worse was that, right up until the very end, there was no indication we were close. No clearing, no elevated ground, no visible structure. It wasn't until we were less than 30 feet away that it finally appeared. We stepped into a break in the trees, and there it was, the fire lookout. It wasn't the tall tower we'd imagined. Instead, it was more like a small cabin perched on a hill, overlooking the forest. Weather-beaten, leaning slightly. The wooden siding was gray and splintered, and most of the windows were either shattered or so clouded with grime they looked painted over. One side of the roof had partially collapsed. The entire structure looked tired. Ethan was visibly excited. I wasn't. Something about the place made my skin crawl, but I kept it to myself. I didn't want to ruin the trip. We circled the cabin once before Ethan knocked on the door, more out of habit than expectation, then pushed it open. The inside was darker than it should have been. Even though windows lined nearly every wall, barely any light made it through. Fog and dirt blocked almost everything. Old tools were scattered across the floor, a broken lantern, rusted cans that looked decades old. And then I noticed something that didn't belong. A clean piece of paper was taped neatly to the far wall. It looked recent. I walked over and peeled it back slightly. Written in plain black ink were 3 words: "Hope you're happy." Ethan and I stared at it in silence. Our first thought was that the Reddit guy was messing with us, some kind of joke or attempt to spook us. But it didn't feel playful. If anything, it felt passive-aggressive, like the message wasn't meant to scare, but to accuse. Still, daylight was fading fast. We closed the door and decided to stay the night. I pulled out my camping stove and started boiling water for ramen. The cabin creaked softly as the wind brushed against it. We ate in silence. That part alone was strange. Ethan and I were usually talking nonstop, joking, theorizing, hyping ourselves up. But that night, neither of us spoke. It felt like the air itself was heavy, pressing down on us, daring us to make noise. Eventually, we crawled into our sleeping bags and drifted off. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up. The room was pitch black. The only sound was the slow, uneven creaking of wood settling. And then I realized something was wrong. Ethan's sleeping bag was empty. I sat up instantly and whispered his name. Nothing. Then, a dull thud echoed through the cabin. Another one followed. Slow, heavy. They were coming from above us. I tilted my head, heart pounding, as the thuds moved across the ceiling, one after another, like footsteps. I barely had time to process what I was hearing before the cabin door creaked open. Ethan stepped inside, causing my heart to nearly jump out of my chest. He froze when he saw me sitting upright, eyes wide. I raised a finger to my lips, instinctively telling him to stay quiet. Whatever had been moving on the roof stopped instantly, like it had never been there at all. Ethan whispered that he'd just stepped outside to pee. I asked him if he'd seen anything on the roof. He stared at me like I was losing my mind. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside anyway. The roof was empty. No footprints, no scratches. Nothing disturbed the snow or debris up there. No explanation. At that point, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Half asleep, nerves getting the better of me. We crawled back into our sleeping bags and somehow managed to sleep through the rest of the night. Morning didn't make things better. Everything felt muted. The forest looked the same, but it felt lifeless, like a backdrop instead of a place. Even sound behaved strangely. Our footsteps felt louder than they should have been, echoing unnaturally. We spent most of the day wandering around the surrounding area, hoping to find something else worth exploring. There was nothing, just endless stretches of thin, half-dead trees that all looked identical, no matter how far we walked. By the time the sun started dipping again, we headed back toward the lookout. That's when Ethan stopped cold. He was halfway through pulling the door shut when he froze, eyes locked on something beyond the clearing. He quietly said my name and motioned for me to come look. About 40 feet away, right where the trees began, stood a man. He looked like a hunter. Shaggy, unkempt hair, scraggly beard, wearing a gray flannel. A rifle hung loosely over his shoulder. But something about him was deeply wrong. He wasn't moving. He wasn't watching the cabin. He was staring through it. His eyes looked empty, dead. Like whatever made him human had checked out a long time ago. I called out to him, asking if he needed help, if he was okay. He didn't respond. After a few seconds, he slowly turned and walked straight into the woods, disappearing between the trees without making a sound. Ethan and I exchanged a look. Neither of us said what we were thinking, but we both felt it. That man didn't belong here. We locked the door and stayed inside. That night, we talked more than the previous one, mostly about leaving first thing in the morning and never recommending this place to anyone. We both agreed something was seriously wrong with the area. Mid-sentence, a shadow passed across Ethan's face. I turned toward the window behind me. Through the fogged glass, I could barely make it out, a shape moving slowly along the exterior wall of the cabin. It circled toward the door. Neither of us spoke. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. 3 soft knocks tapped against the door. Ethan jumped up and slammed the heavy lock into place. A pause. Then, 3 violent blows shook the entire cabin, rattling the walls. We didn't move. We couldn't. After that, nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no shadows. We don't know how long we waited. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, Ethan cracked the door open. There was no one there. We stayed awake until sunrise, sitting back to back, listening for any sound. Neither of us slept. As soon as daylight broke through the fog, we packed up and left. The hike back through the woods felt worse than the way in, like eyes were following us the entire time, just out of view. Neither of us spoke until we reached the car. The first thing I did was check Reddit. The post with the coordinates was gone. The account that posted it had been deleted. I'm convinced now that the person who sent us those coordinates had been there before, that he experienced something similar, maybe worse. And that note, "Hope you're happy," wasn't a joke. It was a warning. Ethan and I still explore abandoned places to this day. We've seen strange things since then, but nothing has ever come close to what happened during those 2 nights at that lookout. And whatever was out there, I don't think it was human. Story 2. I didn't plan to sleep there. I didn't even know the place was forbidden. But at 2 in the morning, when the storm suddenly stopped and my dog started crying at the door, I realized something had been beneath that tower the entire time. Something that wasn't supposed to be there, and something that definitely knew we were. I'm keeping my identity private, but this happened about 5 years ago while I was traveling through remote mountain areas with my dog. His name was Bear. I found him years earlier while hiking through a rocky ridgeline, alone, thin, and clearly abandoned. The vets estimated he was already middle-aged when I found him. No collar, no chip, no missing reports. After weeks of trying to track down an owner, I adopted him. From that point on, he became my constant companion. We hiked year-round, camped in backcountry areas, and spent more nights under open skies than I could count. This trip wasn't meant to be extreme. The plan was simple. A 1-day hike in, a 1-day hike out. The trail followed an old fire break leading up to a retired lookout tower along a ridgeline. I wasn't even planning to stay overnight there. I'd reach the tower, take in the view, then continue down the other side toward a creek where I'd set up my tent. Finding information on the tower was harder than expected. Everything I came across was outdated. Old regulations described it as a public rest shelter with limited stays, but nothing current confirmed it was still accessible. I didn't dig deeper because I didn't expect to be there long. About 30 minutes from the tower, the weather changed fast. Dark clouds rolled over the ridge, thick and heavy, moving unnaturally low. From the exposed trail, I could see a violent storm smashing into the neighboring mountain. It was clearly coming our way. I didn't mind camping in rain, but there was no way I'd make it to the creek and set up before the storm hit. The decision was made for me when rain began pouring down hard enough to sting. I rushed toward the tower, deciding to shelter there temporarily until the storm passed. Up close, the tower looked exactly like a place people had forgotten. White paint peeling off the walls, rusted metal fixtures, a small stove bolted into one corner. The interior was completely empty. No mattress, no trash, no signs of recent use. The wind howled through the structure as the storm intensified, rocking the tower just enough to make the floor groan beneath my boots. I laid out my sleeping bag and prepared a quick freeze-dried meal. Bear, however, refused to settle. He paced near the door, tail tucked, whining softly. He'd never liked storms, but this was different. He wasn't just scared. He was alert, focused. I pulled him closer, running my hand along his back to calm him. That's when I heard it. A dull, hollow sound. Not loud, not rhythmic, just a faint metallic thump beneath the floor. It blended with the rain, noticeable only when the storm briefly eased. It happened a few times, then stopped. Eventually, exhaustion took over. Bear crawled into the sleeping bag with me. The storm became background noise, and I fell asleep. I woke abruptly sometime after 2 in the morning. The silence was immediate and unsettling. The rain was gone. The wind had stopped. The forest outside felt dead. Bear was no longer beside me. He stood near the door, whining quietly, his body stiff. He needed to go out. I grabbed my boots and flashlight and stepped outside with him. The air was cold and heavy. I stayed near the tower, keeping the beam on him as he moved toward the edge of the clearing. That's when I heard it again. A thin metallic squeak, soft, close. I turned and shined my flashlight beneath the tower. That's when I saw it. A pair of metal cellar doors built into the ground directly underneath the structure. I froze. Old lookout towers sometimes had storage spaces, but something about seeing those doors instantly explained the sounds I'd heard earlier. My stomach dropped as I approached them. I lifted one door slowly and aimed the light downward. A short staircase led into darkness. and on every step there were fresh, wet footprints, leading upward. Before I could react, Bear let out a single sharp bark. Terrified, I slammed the door shut and spun around just in time to see movement at the edge of the tree line. Something was watching us. I didn't wait to confirm what I'd seen. The moment Bear barked, I knew we were not alone, and whatever was out there had already decided to reveal itself. I grabbed my pack, shoved the sleeping bag inside without even rolling it properly, clipped everything shut, and backed toward the tower door without taking my eyes off the tree line. Bear refused to move at first. His gaze was locked on the cellar doors beneath the tower, his body low, muscles tense, like he was bracing for something to come out. I grabbed his harness and pulled him with me. The second we stepped off the tower platform, I glanced back under the structure. The cellar doors were open, both of them. They hadn't been opened seconds ago. I was certain of that. The beam of my flashlight caught the edge of one door slowly rocking back and forth, creaking softly in the night air. Bear whimpered and tried to pull away, his claws scraping against the dirt. We didn't run at first. Something in my gut told me not to. The forest was too quiet. No insects, no wind, no distant animals. Just the sound of our own breathing and the faint crunch of wet ground beneath our boots. We moved quickly down the firebreak trail, staying close together. I kept the flashlight low, scanning the ground ahead, refusing to turn it toward the trees. I could feel eyes on us, not following directly behind, watching from parallel, matching our pace just out of sight. About a mile down the trail, rain started again. Heavy, sudden, violent. I almost felt relief when it hit. The noise broke the silence, gave me something real to focus on. We slowed, letting the storm cover our movement, and kept going until dawn. When I reached cell service, I called the Forest Service immediately. I described the tower, the trail, the cellar beneath it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then the ranger told me something that made my blood run cold. That lookout tower had been decommissioned years earlier. It was not open to the public. It was not listed on current maps, and people were explicitly told not to enter the area anymore. I asked why. He wouldn't give details, but the way his voice tightened told me enough. Incidents, complaints, things they didn't officially document, enough that they stopped maintaining it altogether and quietly removed references to it. The most harmless explanation is that someone had been living in that cellar for months, maybe longer, hiding beneath the tower, watching hikers come and go, waiting. But even that doesn't explain why the cellar doors were opening in the middle of the night, or why Bear sensed something long before I did, or why that presence stayed hidden until the exact moment the storm stopped. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd ignored my instincts, if I'd gone back to sleep. What I do know is that when I think about that night, I don't picture the storm or the tower. I picture the footprints on those stairs, pointing up. Story 3. People think the most dangerous part of working alone in the woods is the animals. They're wrong. What happened that night taught me that the forest doesn't need claws to make you disappear. This happened a little over 30 years ago. I'm an old man now, but back in my early 20s, I spent nearly every summer working as a fire lookout for the Forest Ranger Service. I did it for almost a decade straight. It paid well enough for a college kid, but honestly, I would have done it for free. The job was simple: recording temperature, wind, humidity, scanning the horizon for smoke, and radioing in once an hour. Other than that, I was completely alone, miles from anyone. Days passed quietly, peacefully. I walked trails, watched sunsets, learned the woods better than most people ever will. And in all those years, nothing truly unsettling ever happened. Until that night. That day was painfully ordinary. I don't even remember most of it. Same routine, same silence. A few hours after sunset, I logged my final readings and radioed the station to clock out. The overnight ranger on duty was a guy named Evan. I didn't know him well. We'd only met in person a few times, but we talked almost every night over the radio. When you're isolated like that, voices matter. Later, after eating, I stepped out onto the balcony to get some air and look at the stars. That's when I saw it. A flickering orange light deep in the trees below the tower, no more than a quarter-mile away. Too steady to be lightning, too warm to be reflection. I knew immediately. It was a fire. That alone was a problem. There was a strict fire ban in effect due to dry conditions. Any open flame was a serious risk. I radioed Evan, asked if any permits had been issued. He said no. No campers were authorized anywhere near my lookout that night. I gave him the coordinates. The thing that bothered me most was how close the fire was to my tower. Evan told me since it was nearby, I should head down and tell whoever it was to put it out. No confrontation, no citations, just extinguish the fire. I grabbed my radio and flashlight and headed down. I wasn't nervous. The walk was barely 5 minutes, and I'd done worse hikes in the dark. I figured it would be straightforward. It wasn't. When I reached the clearing, there was no campsite, no tents, no gear, just a bonfire, logs stacked deliberately and burning hot, like someone wanted it seen, like a signal. I called out. No answer. I scanned the trees with my flashlight. Nothing moved. The forest was dead silent, unnaturally so. That's when I radioed Evan again, told him nobody was there, that it felt wrong. Maybe a prank meant to draw me out. But this time, he didn't respond. Just static. I tried again. Nothing. In nearly 10 years, I'd never lost contact like that. My skin went cold. I kicked the logs apart, buried the flames, and hurried back toward the tower. Every step felt loud, like I was announcing my location to something watching. When I reached the stairs and climbed up, my stomach dropped. The lookout station was destroyed. Drawers open, equipment scattered, personal items thrown around. Someone had been inside while I was gone. I tried the main radio. Still nothing. I contacted authorities, told them someone was trespassing and tampering with the station. Then I had to choose, stay put or leave. Staying meant being trapped if whoever did this came back. So I grabbed what I could and started the hike down to the ranger station. The trail was 3 miles. It felt like 30. The woods were so quiet I could hear my own breathing. When I finally saw the lights of the station, relief nearly buckled my knees. I called Evan's name as I approached. The door was open. Inside, the place was empty. It looked like Evan had stepped outside suddenly, like he meant to come right back. He never did. I ran, met the police on the road minutes later. They searched for days. Evan was never found. That fire wasn't random. It was a distraction. Something meant to pull both of us out of safety. The state kept it quiet. Tourist park, bad publicity. Easy to bury back then. That was my last summer as a lookout. The tower was never staffed again. And even now, decades later, I still think about how close I came to vanishing too. Story 4. They say if you ever feel watched in the middle of nowhere, you probably are. I didn't believe that until the night I realized the forest wasn't just watching me. It was waiting. I moved to that house because it was cheap, isolated, and quiet. All 3 were things I desperately needed at the time. It sat at the end of a gravel road that most people didn't even know existed, surrounded by dense woodland on 3 sides and a shallow ravine on the 4th. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away, far enough that you'd never see lights or hear voices. It was the kind of place you chose when you didn't want to be found. The realtor had warned me, casually, that the area had a reputation. He didn't elaborate, just smiled nervously and changed the subject. I assumed it was the usual rural nonsense, rumors, bored locals, maybe an old crime blown out of proportion. I signed the papers anyway. The first week was peaceful. Too peaceful, actually. No traffic. No distant engines, no dogs barking. Even the birds were strangely scarce. At night, the forest swallowed sound completely. When the wind stopped, it felt like the world itself had been muted. The house was old but solid. 2 stories, creaky wooden floors, a basement that smelled like damp earth and rusted metal. I avoided the basement as much as possible. Something about it made my skin crawl, like standing too close to a deep hole you couldn't see the bottom of. On the 8th night, everything changed. I was sitting in the living room around 11 p.m., half watching something mindless on TV. The only lights on were the lamp beside the couch and the glow from the screen. Outside the windows, nothing but blackness pressed against the glass. No moon, no stars, just the outline of trees swaying gently. That's when I heard the knock. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. 3 slow, deliberate taps on the front door. I froze. Nobody ever came out there. Nobody. Deliveries didn't even make it that far. Friends refused to visit after dark. The idea of someone standing on my porch that late didn't make sense. I muted the TV and listened. Silence. After about a minute, I stood up and approached the door quietly, heart hammering. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty. The gravel driveway stretched out into darkness, undisturbed. No footprints, no movement. I convinced myself it was the house settling, or maybe a branch hitting the door. I locked up and went to bed, telling myself I was overreacting. I didn't sleep well. The next morning I found footprints. They were faint, almost hidden by the gravel, but unmistakably human, barefoot, leading from the tree line, across the yard, up to the porch, and stopping directly in front of the door. No footprints leading away. I stared at them for a long time, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone had come by earlier and left another way. Maybe rain had washed the rest away, but there hadn't been rain. That uneasy feeling settled into my chest and didn't leave. Over the next few days, small things started happening. The kind of things you could explain away if you tried hard enough. Cabinets left open. The basement door unlocked when I knew I'd locked it. Scratches on the outside walls, long and uneven, like someone dragging their fingers across the wood. Every night around the same time, just after 11, I'd hear movement outside. Slow footsteps circling the house. Always just out of sight. Always stopping if I turned on a light. I bought cameras, 3 of them. One facing the driveway, one covering the back of the house, and one pointed directly at the tree line behind the ravine. I installed them myself, tested them twice, and checked the feed constantly. The first night with the cameras, nothing showed up. The second night, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to my phone vibrating violently on the nightstand. Motion detected. I opened the app with shaking hands. The driveway camera showed nothing. The back camera showed nothing. The forest camera was different. At first, I thought the image was frozen. The feed showed the trees, motionless, washed in night vision green. Then I noticed it. Something was standing between the trees. Tall. Too tall. Its body was thin, unnaturally thin, like stretched skin over a frame that didn't belong to a human. Its face was turned toward the camera, but the features were wrong. Blurred, smeared, as if the camera couldn't properly focus on it. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. The timestamp in the corner kept ticking. The feed was live. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute before the image glitched violently and went black. When the feed came back, the figure was gone. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning, all 3 cameras were offline. The cables hadn't been cut. The batteries hadn't died. They were simply empty, as if they'd never been installed. That was when I decided I was leaving. I packed a bag, threw essentials into my car, and planned to stay in a hotel in the nearest town until I could figure out what to do next. I didn't even bother cleaning up. I just wanted out. As I stepped onto the porch, I noticed something carved into the wood beside the door. A single word. Late. I didn't understand it at the time. I do now, because as I turned toward my car, I realized the forest was no longer quiet. Something was moving through it, fast, and it wasn't alone. They found my car before I did. I heard it first. The crunch of gravel, not from my driveway, but from the far side of the yard, where there wasn't supposed to be a path at all. The sound was wrong, like something heavy moving slowly, testing each step. I stood frozen on the porch with my keys in my hand, staring into the dark, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. Then the motion lights flickered on. They didn't brighten smoothly the way they always had. They stuttered, flashing twice like a dying bulb, and in that brief strobe, I saw movement near the tree line. Not one shape, but several. Low to the ground, then upright, then gone again, like a group learning how to stand properly. My breath caught. Instinct finally kicked in. I bolted off the porch, sprinted across the yard, and yanked the driver's door open so hard it bounced back against its hinge. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine didn't start. It turned, it tried. It coughed once like it was about to catch, then died. I tried again. Same thing, a dry sputter, then nothing. Panic made my hands clumsy. I fumbled my phone and hit the screen to call someone, anyone, then stopped when I saw the signal icon. No bars. Not even the weak one-bar service I sometimes got if I stood on the porch and held the phone above my head. The motion lights on the house went out again. The yard fell back into darkness. And then, right beside the driver's window, something tapped the glass. 3 soft taps. Calm, patient. My entire body locked up. I turned my head, slowly, like I was afraid that fast movement would trigger something. Nothing was there. Just my own reflection and the darkness beyond it. Then the tapping moved. Not around the car, not to the back window. Upward, on the roof. A gentle, deliberate patter traveling from the hood toward the top of the car, like bare feet stepping carefully so they wouldn't slip. The metal above me creaked under the weight. Whatever it wasn't light. I held my breath, listening. My heartbeat seemed loud enough to give me away. The patter stopped directly over the driver's seat, and a shape slowly lowered into view, upside down, as if it was peering through the top edge of the windshield. It wasn't a face the way you expect a face to be. It had the vague suggestion of one. A pale oval, eyes too far apart, mouth slightly open, but the details refused to settle. My brain kept trying to sharpen it into something human and failing, like focusing on a moving insect on glass. It stared at me without blinking. Then it smiled. The smile was wrong. Not wide, not exaggerated, just knowing, like it had been waiting for this moment. I slammed my palms against the steering wheel and yelled, more out of terror than anger. The sound ripped out of me and disappeared into the woods like it had been swallowed. The thing didn't flinch. It tilted its head slowly, still upside down. Then, from somewhere behind the car, I heard the crunch of gravel again. More footsteps, multiple, coming closer. The upside-down face slipped out of view, as if it had risen back onto the roof. The roof creaked again. Then something heavy slid down the side of the car and landed on the ground with a soft thud. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was standing right outside my door. The handle on the driver's side twitched once, then again. Then the entire door shook, not with a violent yank, but with controlled pressure, like someone trying it gently at first, making sure it was locked. I whimpered. I actually made a sound like an animal. The pressure stopped. Silence. For a few seconds there was nothing but my breathing and the faint distant sound of wind moving through the treetops. Then the backseat door handle lifted. I snapped my gaze to the rearview mirror. The lock on the back door clicked up by itself. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like falling. I didn't have time to think. I threw myself across the seat toward the back, reaching for the lock with shaking fingers to shove it down. As I did, the door opened. Not wide. Just enough to let cold air pour in like a living thing. And in the crack, I saw fingers. Long, thin fingers, pale in the darkness, with nails that looked too flat, too wide, like they'd been filed down into blunt edges. They gripped the inside of the door and pulled. I screamed and slammed the lock down, then shoved the door with my shoulder. It shut with a heavy clunk. For a second, I thought I'd won. Then the window beside me fogged instantly, as if someone had exhaled onto it. A shape leaned close on the other side of the glass. and a fingertip traced something into the fog, one letter at a time. LATE. My blood went cold. The word from the porch. The carved warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. I was late. That was when I heard the sound that made my mind split between terror and disbelief. A key turning. The ignition clicked. My engine roared to life. The radio turned on by itself, blasting static loud enough to make me jump. The headlights flickered, then brightened, washing the yard in harsh white light. And in that sudden clarity, I saw them. Not one, not two, at least 5 shapes standing around my car, spaced like a ring. They weren't all the same height. Some were tall and thin, some were hunched. One was low to the ground like it crawled. None of them moved like normal people. They stood in unnatural stillness, heads angled slightly as if listening to something I couldn't hear. The one closest to my window lifted its hand, not to wave, to press its palm against the glass. Its skin looked stretched and dry, like paper pulled tight, and its fingers were too long for its hand. I slammed the car into reverse. The tires spun on the gravel. The car jolted backward, and the shapes didn't scatter like people would. They didn't jump away. They just moved aside at the last possible moment, calmly, as if they already knew exactly where the car would go. As I reversed, my headlights swept the yard, and for a split second, the beam hit the forest camera mounted on the post near the ravine. It was back, but it wasn't pointed at the trees anymore. It was pointed at my house, like it had always been watching from the other direction. I didn't stop. I swung the wheel, threw the car into drive, and tore down the gravel road faster than I'd ever dared, bouncing so hard my teeth clicked together. The woods blurred past, dark walls closing in on both sides. I expected them to chase me. I expected to see something in the mirror, but the road behind me stayed empty. No headlights, no running figures, no sound, just darkness. I drove for 10 minutes straight before I saw the first sign of civilization, a single street lamp at a crossroads. My hands were still clenched so hard on the steering wheel they ached. I didn't breathe normally until I hit the highway and saw other cars. Only then did I glance down at my phone again. 1 bar of service. I called 911 so fast I almost dropped it. When the operator answered, my voice sounded wrong, thin and distant, like it belonged to someone else. I told her my location, told her I'd had intruders, told her something was wrong at my house and I didn't feel safe going back. She asked if I could describe who was on my property. I opened my mouth to speak and realized I didn't know how. They weren't people. They weren't animals. They weren't anything my brain could label without lying. So I said the first honest thing that came out. I think they were waiting for me. The operator paused, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. Then she asked if anyone had been harmed. I looked at my hands on the wheel. My knuckles were scraped. My wrists were bruised from slamming against the lock. My throat burned from screaming. But I was alive. "No," I whispered. "Not yet." They told me to meet an officer at the gas station in town and to stay in my car until they arrived. I did exactly that. I parked under bright lights, right next to a row of cameras, and waited with my doors locked and my engine running. When the police cruiser finally pulled in, I almost cried from relief. An officer stepped out and approached my window carefully. He kept his hand near his belt, not because he thought I was dangerous, but because he could see the look on my face and didn't know what he was walking into. He asked me to explain everything from the start. I did. I told him about the knocks, the footprints, the cameras, the figure on the roof, the fogged window, the word late. He listened without interrupting, but the longer I spoke, the more his expression shifted into something I recognized immediately. That polite, careful look people get when they think you're panicking and exaggerating. When I finished, he asked me if I'd been drinking. I shook my head. No. He asked if I took any medication. I shook my head again, anger rising. Then he said, "We'll go out there and take a look, okay? Just stay here for now." It sounded reassuring, but it felt like dismissal. 2 cruisers drove back with me trailing behind at a distance. When we turned onto the gravel road leading to my house, my stomach knotted. Every tree looked like a hiding place. Every shadow felt like a face just out of focus. The officers pulled into my driveway first. Their headlights lit up the yard. And everything looked normal. No ring of figures, no footprints, no broken anything. My porch light was off, the windows dark. One officer walked up to the door and knocked loudly, announcing himself. No response. He tried the handle. Locked. They made me stand back while they went around the house, sweeping flashlights across the yard and tree line. Nothing. Then one officer called out that he found something by the porch. My heart lurched. I ran closer before he could stop me. He was pointing at the wood beside the door where I'd seen the carved word. But now it wasn't just one word. There were more. Not carved deep like the first. These were shallow, as if done quickly with something sharp, pressed in hard enough to mark, but not to gouge. 3 lines. You left. You came back. Don't. I stared at it until my eyes burned. The officer asked me if I did that. I laughed, a broken sound that didn't match how terrified I felt. Why would I do that? He didn't answer. Because he didn't have a good one. They searched inside next. The house was exactly how I'd left it when I ran. TV remote on the couch, lamp on, half-empty glass in the kitchen. No signs of forced entry. Then the officer in the back called again. He was standing at the basement door. It was open. I knew I'd left it closed. He shined his flashlight down the basement stairs. The beam cut through dust and darkness and landed on the damp concrete floor. There were footprints. Bare footprints. Fresh. Leading from the basement stairs, up, toward the kitchen, and stopping directly beneath the front door. No prints going back down. The officer turned to look at me. His face had changed. The polite skepticism was gone. In its place was something tighter, something like fear he didn't want to admit. He cleared his throat and said quietly, "Sir, where's your basement window access?" I swallowed, mouth dry. There isn't one. He kept his flashlight steady on the footprints. Then how did someone come up here barefoot without leaving any prints outside? I couldn't answer. Because I already knew the answer, and it was worse than anything I could say out loud. They hadn't come from the woods. They hadn't come from the yard. They'd been inside my house before I ever heard the knocking. They weren't luring me into the den. They were making sure I noticed, making sure I left. And the worst part was, they didn't stop when I left. They waited for me to come back. When the police finally arrived, I thought the fear would fade. That's what you expect, right? Sirens, flashlights, voices. Proof that you're not alone anymore. But the moment they stepped inside the house, something changed. The 2 officers stopped talking almost immediately. One of them raised his hand slightly, a silent signal for the other to pause, like they'd both sensed something was off at the exact same time. They didn't ask me many questions at first. Instead, they walked through the house slowly, methodically, their flashlights cutting through rooms I suddenly didn't recognize anymore. The living room felt smaller. The hallway felt longer. Every sound echoed too much. One officer lingered near the bedroom door longer than necessary, shining his light across the floor, then up the walls, then into the closet. He didn't say anything, but I saw his jaw tighten. That's when they found it. Behind the house, where the snow had started to settle again, there were footprints. Not just one set, not just 2, dozens. Barely visible at first, overlapping, circling the structure, pressed deep into the ground as if the snow hadn't been the first thing there that night. The strangest part wasn't the number of them. It was the direction. None of the tracks led away from the house. Every single one pointed toward it. One of the officers asked me, very calmly, if I'd noticed any strangers in the area recently. I told him everything. The lights, the man at the window, the running footsteps, the way they moved around the house like they already knew where everything was. He nodded, but his eyes never left the ground. Then they went back inside. In the far room, the one with the light that kept turning off, They found scratch marks along the inside of the door frame, shallow at first, then deeper, like someone had tested the wood repeatedly. On the wall near the switch, faint smudges marked where fingers had rested for long periods of time, too high to be accidental, too deliberate to ignore. One officer finally spoke up. He asked me how long I'd lived there. When I answered, he exchanged a look with his partner that made my stomach drop. They stepped outside with me and told me, carefully, that this wasn't the first call they'd received from this area. Similar reports, similar timing, people noticing movement, lights, shadows, and always the same pattern. Activity escalating only when the person was alone. I asked them if anyone had ever been caught. They didn't answer right away. Instead, one of them asked me something I still think about almost every night. He said, "When you noticed the light turning off, how long did you stand there before moving?" I told him the truth. A few seconds, maybe longer. He nodded slowly and said, "That's usually when it happens." They didn't elaborate. The house was declared temporarily unsafe. Broken windows, structural damage, signs of forced entry. I was told to pack essentials and stay somewhere else. As I gathered my things, I noticed something that made my hands shake so badly I had to sit down. On the inside of my bedroom door, just below the handle, were faint marks. Fingerprints. Smudged. Old. Not mine. Not fresh enough to be new, but not faded enough to be forgotten. As if someone had stood there many times before, holding the handle, waiting for me to open the door. I never went back to that house alone again. Contractors handled the repairs. The sale went through faster than expected. The realtor didn't ask many questions, and I didn't offer answers. I moved farther away than I ever planned to. Somewhere louder, somewhere brighter. But the thing is, it didn't end there. Months later, I woke up in my new place to a notification from my security camera. Just one clip. Time-stamped late at night. The video showed nothing at first. An empty hallway, lights off, silence. Then, right before the clip ended, the camera glitched. For less than a second, a shadow crossed the frame, too close to the lens to be outside the house. The system labeled the event automatically. Late. I unplugged the camera that night. I still tell people I like being alone, but I never sit in the dark anymore, and I never ignore the feeling of being watched, because whatever was waiting back there wasn't trying to scare me. It was waiting for me to be late.